you see athletes developing their own persona and level of sophistication in terms of like storytelling and how their careers actually become enterprises. And a part of that is what made them great in their sport also could make them great in business.
Welcome back to Portfolio Players, presented by E-Trade from Morgan Stanley. I'm Dan Roberts here at FOS in New York. And we've got Kai Cunningham, the VC and founder of Limited Ventures. Kai, thanks for coming in.
Appreciate you having me. Thank you.
So can I just start this way? You're very young for everything you've done. I mean, I'm 37. Are you still under 30?
I'm 30.
You're 30. Okay,
Yeah.
You got a lot of time left here. Started at Goldman.
Yeah.
And you were only there 3 years as an analyst, and then you got into everything we're talking about today, investment in sports. So I guess I'd start this way. Is this just where the puck is headed for almost everyone in banking? It seems like everyone we talk to, like, they started in banking, and then they went to what's really sexy and exciting, and that is investing in sports now.
That's an interesting take. Like the thing for me is I actually never got into finance because I loved finance. I got into finance and investing to try to solve and break generational curses in my own family, right? Come from very humble beginnings. My father was actually killed when I was 2. And because of that absence, I actually was able to turn that into a positive because I sought out mentorship across the board as I kind of climbed the ranks, right? And what I noticed at an early age was certain people had what was called a family office. And I also noticed that athletes and entertainers didn't really have that sort of infrastructure. So I've always had a North Star of solving what I believe the most important word in family office is family. And a lot of times when you have the Wall Street background or the investing background, that's kind of like what people assume to be the number one thing, like investments, returns. But if we just put it in its simplest form, I don't think there's been a functioning society in history that didn't have family at the core of it. And I think that element is lost oftentimes when we talk about investing, private equity, venture capital, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, it's always been the underlying family dynamic, trying to solve for that. And I read a quote, I forget who it was by, so forgive me that they don't get credit on this, but it said, if you're trying to solve a problem that can be solved in one lifetime, you're thinking too small. So for me, this is something that I think will transcend generations trying to solve this problem, because as a culture, a lot of times the backgrounds and the environments that athletes and entertainers come from, they're the first person in their family to attain wealth, but they don't have too many examples of actually passing that wealth down. So our platform is all about education and connecting them to families who have passed down generational wealth, generation to generation. And how do we apply that to athletes and entertainers who are making hundreds of millions of dollars now? So
yeah, speaking of education, I mean, do you think that people in the traditional banking, finance, private equity world, especially as PE is getting more into sports, do they inherently understand sports? I mean, they certainly understand investing and getting a return, but I feel like those who are more successful in this field either played a sport or they've been in sports first, but now you've got kind of traditional suits trying to get in.
Yeah, I think great question. I think there's definitely a disconnect and there's definitely gray area. You know what I mean? Like there's certain kind of cultural things that one group would know from actually playing the sport versus another group who's just doing the analytics on it, right? And I think that's where the industry is heading, right? Like you see athletes developing their own persona and level of sophistication in terms of like storytelling and how their careers actually become enterprises. And a part of that is what made them great in their sport also could make them great in business. And I think sometimes that part is a little bit overlooked from the business community. But I also think it's interesting because there is something to be said about understanding the actual mechanics of investing in sports teams and investing in deals. A part of my thesis has always been that there's nothing in modern portfolio theory that accounts for a player's influence, right? So for me, it was about how do you kind of congregate and aggregate collective influence from athletes and entertainers, and how does that impact your portfolio? How does that impact your family structure, right? Like we get a lot of guys free equity in deals or sweat equity deals for their influence. They didn't put money up, but they put their likeness up, right? So that's something that I don't think traditional investing has accounted for. And we're starting to see that materialize in real ways.
That's really interesting when you talk about, free equity or sweat equity, because I do think a lot of people, when they see that X athlete has just invested in Y startup or Y team, nowadays, many people, I think, assume that they probably didn't even put any of the money up. I mean, it depends who the person is. And I think that's probably usually not the case, but is sometimes the case. But certainly what the company, whether it's a startup or what the fledgling league or team gets out of having a known name athlete as an investor, it's hard to quantify that.
Yeah, it's very difficult to quantify. And I think that's also a part of the gray area, right? Like, how do you try to map exactly what the impact of this athlete or group of athletes is? Maybe it's clicks or views, but where we really focus is true impact, right? Like, we talked about the National Thoroughbred League, right? And, Lamar Jackson is, the face of the Maryland franchise. He wouldn't do the deal unless there was a charitable component giving back to inner city youth, teaching kids how to ride horses, right? Like, that's real tangible impact from a player, and it had nothing to do with clicks, right? Like, the deal literally wouldn't have got done if he didn't have that sentiment. So kudos to him and his mom for having that vision and structure, as a part of the deal.
It's funny, you mentioned horse racing, and this is exactly where I want to go next, which is right now, everyone wants to own a piece of a sports team.
Yep.
Almost any sports team.
Yep.
Obviously there's levels to this, but you're in pickleball, you're in horse racing. Lamar Jackson is in horse racing. I don't know how much he knows about horse racing. He's probably quickly self-educating. But what do you think it is right now that's causing this boom? Of course, it was always a good investment to own a sports franchise, especially in the big leagues, obviously. That's not new. The idea of a family office isn't new. But right now, something is happening here and heating up more than ever, right?
Yeah, I say a few things to that. I mean, first, our perspective is that when you look at any sports team or sports franchise, right, like, it's the ecosystem play, right? So when we think about trying to translate that to returns, it could be in the holding company. It could be in the tech used to scan the tickets. It could be in, the media viewership. Like, there's a there are multi-layered variables in terms of monetizing your investment. So if you're a player or an athlete or celebrity, yes, you can add your likeness, but what does it also look like to invest throughout the ecosystem? Maybe you are an investor in a fintech company, and a part of the deal is making sure that they're involved, when processing ticket sales, right? So I think it's a multi-layered approach that's becoming exciting. And that's at the earlier and growth stage levels, right? Like, minority investors in major teams like the NBA or the NFL may not have the opportunity to have that much influence immediately. But then those conversations turn into, how do you network with the team owners and his or her group of friends who may be billionaires that could help out on another deal, right? So I think community impact and this idea of a community approach is something that gets people excited, right? And sports is the ultimate unifier. You know what I mean? No matter what color you are, what beliefs you have, what your political views are, you're sitting next to someone at a game and you guys are all of a sudden best friends, right? So I think that also translates to the cap table.
You're a good example of something I think we're seeing, which is whether it's the athletes themselves, the guys advising the athletes, the guys running the VC firms, those who are investing in sports are also very heavy on tech. Mm-hmm. And I don't know kind of what explains that phenomenon, other than obviously where a lot of the excitement and growth is right now is tech startups,
Yep.
Exciting consumer tech. You're in a number of these. What comes first, and how did that kind of thesis evolve for you? Because you wanted to invest in sports, but also I know you're in a lot of the hottest early tech startups.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think for us, depending on the client, and it is probably worth giving the context, right? So in our venture fund, there's over 100 athletes and entertainers that invest. But then we have a family office vertical that tries to handle A to Z for specific key athletes, but that's really about problem solving for their families. So within their family office structure, they may have their own venture vehicle that we partner with them on, execute the diligence, and find deals that fit their overall thesis. So I don't necessarily think it's a matter of what comes first. I think it's a matter of, does this fit in with the overall goal and strategy of the family? Because I think a part of the issue that we've seen historically with athletes is that, yes, they may have a business manager, they may have a financial advisor or two, they may have family and friends, but who really sits there and help all of those people unify and move in the same direction, right? It's like playing a sport. It would be the same as if, you had a point guard, but then your shooting guard is like running plays for the other team. Your power forward is trying to take the ball from the point guard, and the center just goes and sits on the bench, right? Like, how do you make sure everyone is running an offense together? And I think that translates well to family office. And sometimes it is venture and tech investing first, right? From 2016 to, I would say, around 2021 and 22, it was the hottest thing in the market, like athletes investing in tech.
Yep.
What I'm seeing now for a lot of guys is they want cash flow and real estate investment, something that's a little bit more consistent, right? Given the slowdown that's been happening in venture markets, right? So for us, I'm really fortunate to have the co-founders and partners that I have because I'm able to have conversations in response to what's happening in the market, right? So we wrote out a real estate fund and we're kicking off monthly cash flow because a lot of these athletes actually don't get paid in the off season. And the family have been investing their own capital for 3 generations in this strategy and didn't need to or want to take in outside capital. But once we had conversations with the athletes that we worked with, this made a lot of sense for them, right? So now it's like you see our name on a check every 30 days. So behind the NBA and the NFL or whatever league you're in, we try to provide some sort of return for you guys or for the athletes, so they see our names a lot.
Now, real estate is sort of less sexy than tech startup investing, right? Or at least, there's not as much to present and talk about. Like Saquon Barkley, invested in Ramp, which we use for, reimbursements for people. So I know Ramp. He appeared in a Super Bowl ad. And then just last week, we saw that he's also invested in Anduril, which is defense tech. And he tweeted out a photo with like the whole Anduril team. And that was pretty cool for all of them, I'm sure. If it's just real estate investing, like not really, there's no cool photo to do from the headquarters of the tech startup.
I agree, but I respectfully disagree because there's nothing sexier than getting a check every month, and there's nothing sexier than taking care of your family from the interest of your investments, right? Like a part of, what's being communicated to the media and the press about the challenges that athletes have with their families is that I think it's miscommunicated the role and the level of trust that athletes have with their friends and family that they grew up with, right? So while a lot of the industry, I won't say the entire industry, says, oh, that guy that you grew up with, your best friend, kind of move him out the circle. What we're saying is no, like how do we find a role for him within your ecosystem? Because trust is the number one factor. And I think there's a lot of mistrust when it comes to families that come from certain environments and then kind of being thrusted into the spotlight or being thrown so much money, right? So for us, I think it is sexy to, help your family out and help, maybe put them on salary from your returns or, help them start to understand how these things work as well. Because ultimately, if you trust them, there's a place for them in your family office, the way that we think about it.
One more for you on tech. You on the VC side, you're in Airbnb and SpaceX, Coinbase, Lime.
Yeah.
How do these deals kind of come across your desk and how early do you first hear about it? And then how do you go about, to the athletes I'm working with, and you work on the investing side with Kyler Murray and so there's Breanna Stewart and WNBA. At what point do you call their people or call them directly and say, hey, here's one that might be interesting to you?
Yeah, I say a few things. Starting at the end first, right? Our structure now is really poised at helping business managers or whoever the best friend is or whoever owns the relationship. We really want to be complementary to them and provide infrastructure to do what they're already going to do, right? So our model is scalable because we help business managers, right? I want to give a shout out to, you mentioned Kyler Murray. His team is phenomenal, right? Keon Alexander's his business manager. Kevin Murray is his dad, right? Like we talk every single day, but it's their vision and foresight. We just try to help provide the infrastructure to help accelerate what they're already going to do. But a lot of this started happening because when I was at Goldman, right, the group I was in covered some of Goldman's biggest clients. And I would be in meetings and would overhear, hey, our family office just exited this deal, or we made 30 times our money. And I would ask, like, how do I get involved? And they would laugh until I would also overhear that they're going to the Knicks game or the Jets game or the Giants game. And I'm like, well, my friends play on the team. Do you want to, go into the locker room after the game? Or do you want to get dinner and get your kid's jersey signed? So now that narrative shifted from me asking to, hey, there's 20 players that you watch on TV that want to invest. And they were like, oh, absolutely. The amazing part about it wasn't just the access, it was the pricing that was happening, right? We were getting free equity into companies because of who the founder's kid's favorite player was, right? Or discounts into deals because family offices love the community that we built around connecting them to athletes and entertainers.
Yeah, I mean, this just speaks to the power of having an athlete on board, you know, in myriad different ways. And that kind of opens a number of doors for you. When you look around the space right now, I know that you have investments in a couple different NBA teams. Mm-hmm. That's through SPVs. And I think a lot of regular folks don't even really understand that that's something that can be done. Of course, that's very different than being like an actual face of a team, a full-on minority owner. But when you look at the different leagues below, say, the Big Four, what's most interesting and exciting to you? And is it the ultimate aspiration to own a full kind of stake in one of those big pro teams?
I'd say absolutely. I mean, if you think about, just the overall direction of the industry, as you referenced before, like owning a sports team is like the cream of the crop. It's like the North Star for a lot of folks. And what's interesting about it is it's not just about money, right? Like some of the wealthiest people in the world have been trying to buy sports teams for decades, right? But it's really more about community and access and some of those other variables in terms of how you fit in with the other owners, right? So for me, like, one of the most interesting things would be eventually to own a team, but it wouldn't be for the sole purpose of saying it. It would be, how does that team impact the community, right? Like ultimately, I would love for Baltimore to come back with an NBA team and like maybe I own it. So that would be pretty cool. But with some of the startup leagues, I mean, we talked about it already, the National Thoroughbred League, right? When you look at something like horse racing that historically hasn't had much innovation, right? What I thought about and what we really loved and tried to execute on is, how do we bring the culture and cultural influencers as well as this team dynamic to a sport that didn't really have it, right? Like a part of why I'm a huge Ravens fan is because I was born in Baltimore, right? Like obviously have a relationship with ownership, but like being from somewhere geographically tied to it, I was born into it at no customer acquisition costs for the Ravens, right? Like, so that element you didn't really have in horse racing, right? Like you're excited to go to the Preakness and go to the Kentucky Derby and bet.
But that's all I can think of.
That's all you can think of, right? So we really tried to introduce the element because athletes have so much influence, right? So the idea of around having someone like Nelly on the cap table in the National Thoroughbred League or Dr. J, right? Like their respective followings are going to be now interested in what they're interested in, right? So it's, how do you monetize their likeness as it pertains to a sport? And if that can be executed for the talent, or not even talent, the investors in this standpoint, right, it's going to be a massive, massive win for them and something we all enjoy doing.
So you don't view the Wizards as your NBA team, clearly?
Absolutely not. I grew up a Kobe fan, RIP to Kobe, man. Like I literally moved to downtown LA because of Kobe Bryant. So huge Kobe fan, but I'm a diehard Ravens fan.
Got it. So what would be your dream? Obviously, it sounds like the Ravens. Any other team that, like, man, if I could have anything and be a part owner of X?
Well, I mean, if someone made me the majority owner, or if I was able to invest, I mean, any team, I would automatically be a fan. But I literally grew up a mile away from M&T Bank in Camden Yards, so that one would hit home the most.
We talked about Kyler Murray, Breanna Stewart. There's a number of athletes you already work with. As you look around at things people are doing in business, obviously there's LeBron. You mentioned that the childhood friend often is very smart and savvy and has a role. Maverick Carter is probably the best example. Yeah. Apart from that, are there examples of athletes right now that you look at what they're up to off the court and you're like, that's how you do it? That's the right example.
Yeah, I would say Danny Green is one of the first that comes to mind, right? Like we helped Danny launch Greenlight Venture Partners. So his venture vehicle has made over 30 investments, already had some exits. But I attribute that, I'm giving a lot of shout outs, but like Amjad, Danny's right-hand guy in terms of structuring inside the green room, right? So this multi-family office approach can't happen without those people who are already doing the work. And again, we just try to put the battery in their back to help them accelerate, right? But Danny is gracefully transitioned to a blossoming journalism career, right? He's on ESPN and SportsCenter. He's investing in tech. He's investing in real estate. And again, like this started with the family dynamic, right? Like just had a son, so he's thinking about passing his wealth down. But the question becomes, how do you have the structure to do that? How do you have the experiences that tie in to actually passing down wealth? And he's someone at the forefront of it.
We talked about the horse racing. We talked about NBA. How about pickleball?
Yep.
You're invested in pickleball.
Yep. Yeah, I love pickleball. I mean, I don't play myself, right? These days, I try to stick to the golf course, right? Because I can't, tear an ACL or pull a hammy or anything like that. But the interesting thing is when you look at some of these emerging leagues, right, going from 20,000 viewers to 1 million viewers has an actual tangible impact from an ROI perspective, right? Because ultimately, most, if not all, sports teams are heavily dependent on some form of a media rights deal, right? So the delta between
have to get eyeballs.
Exactly. So the delta between your original viewership and increased viewership is one of the most important variables. And we've seen that in pickleball happen in a short period of time. Now, will they get to, 10 million viewers a day? Maybe, maybe not. I love to see it. But if you can get in early enough to where something is on the brink and then add some of the cultural capital from the athletes and entertainers to the cap table, and it becomes cool and trendy. Again, like that's the impact of athletes, being able to invest into leagues and teams like that.
You might need another COVID for that to happen. I mean, God forbid, but that's what, people wanting to be outside, distanced. I feel like pickleball was one of the things that picked up because of the pandemic.
Right, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
When you look around the space now, what opportunities do you see when it comes to fledgling leagues, women's sports specifically, outside the U.S., international? There's a lot happening. As we look at people investing in sports right now, you see a lot of minority stakes in foreign soccer clubs.
Yep.
And then it varies the extent to which, how much are you really present, going over there, watching the games? Obviously, Wrexham has become like the go-to example. But what are you not in yet that you think is interesting and exciting too?
It's a good question. We're not in a lot of things that I think is exciting, but I mean, you mentioned women's sports, right? Like, I think something very special is happening in women's sports, and I think something very interesting will happen. This is a prediction, right? But if you look at the NBA team owners that also own WNBA teams, I think that there will be a sort of schism at some point to put more resources and infrastructure around people who want to focus on these WNBA franchises full time, right? And I think, the interesting thing about sports is a lot of times the traditional fundamentals of investing don't actually apply to the purchase price of these teams, right? Like,
it's emotional.
Yeah, it's emotional. If the Celtics just sold for $6.1 billion reportedly. I don't know the actual numbers, right? But it's like, maybe they were worth $5 billion, but I'm willing to pay $6 billion to beat out this person, or because I really love the Celtics, or I really want to own a team, right? And I think some of that will trickle down or trickle over to when we think about WNBA teams from an exit perspective, right? If someone really wants to be involved because, they love the sport, or they played, or their kids play, or their kids love it, right? Like, that can actually represent an amazing return on investment, right? Just because you love the team and the sport. Then that doesn't mean that the underlying fundamentals won't get there eventually. But when we're talking about these transactions, like, the traditional fundamental metrics don't always apply one-to-one, in sports.
100%. It's emotional.
Yeah.
It's not just financial. Kai, let's end on this. I saw you say somewhere that you believe in the importance of failure. Mm-hmm. What have you messed up? What have you failed with?
Man, I mess up on a lot of things every day, right? Like, I forget, I'm really bad at remembering where I find my quotes at. But someone said, show me someone successful and I'll show you someone that's failed a bunch of times, right? And I think, like, all of this starts with the identity and the notion of a dream or a belief, right? Like, if you think of any NBA player, at some point they had the idea that they can make it. And I'm sure, we know the story about Michael Jordan getting cut from his team, right? Like, for me, it's like failure is a part of the process, right? But I think not being afraid to fail is one of those things that makes some of the most successful people successful, right? Like, think about LeBron, think about any great athlete. They've probably missed, or they have missed more shots than they've taken, right? Even if LeBron is shooting over 50% for his career, you got to factor in the practice shots, right? Like, you got to factor in what's happening when people aren't looking. And sometimes we get exacerbated with the idea that, like, failure is final. And I think failure is just a part of the process.
Yeah, certainly in today's NBA, they're taking a lot of shots.
Right.
Taking a lot of shots. A lot of threes. Kai, thanks so much.
I appreciate you for having me. Thank you so much.